Hey, what's up, everybody? Back with another edition of NBA Breakdown. We've got a super short NBA slate today, just 2 games. And so I'm going to take this opportunity to do something a little bit different. I am going to walk through those 2 games that we've got. But then something that has really been interesting to me that I wanted to share some with you is when I see players, especially star players who are out for a game, and you kind of make assumptions about what that's going to do to how a team plays. But then it actually ends up going a little differently than you would think. And so I'm going to walk through 6 players who have sort of a surprising impact on their team when they're out. But first, let's walk through the 2 games today, breaking them down for Tuesday, January 18th. The first game up is the Timberwolves and the Knicks. Minnesota is now -2.5. They started out close to a pick 'em or maybe -1.5, but it's gone up to 2.5. And the total here is 213.5. It's pretty understandable why the total in this game would be relatively low, and that's that the Knicks have been absolutely filthy on defense at home. In their last 10 at home, they've only allowed over 100 points one time. They allowed 124 in one of those games, but they've allowed under 90 2 of those times. So they've allowed under 90 more than they've allowed over 100. Part of the reason for that is that they're playing at an incredibly slow pace. So their pace on the season is the lowest in the league at 95.03, but they've played under 95 in 7 of their last 10 games. So this is a team that's just playing super slow. They are limiting teams pretty well, too, in terms of their shooting. 43.9% field goal percentage allowed on the year, and they've held teams under that in 9 out of the last 15. 34.7% three-point percentage, held teams under that about 50% of the time. Again, 7 out of 15. And then with rebounds, they're allowing 43.98 on the season, which isn't terrible, but they've held teams under that in 3 straight and 8 out of 15. So they're just limiting teams in pretty much every offensive category, and that's why they've been doing so phenomenally on defense. On the other side, you have a Minnesota team that's playing really well. Hold on, I got to fix this. This light's driving me crazy. It got too bright somehow. There we go. Now I'm not angelic anymore. So Minnesota on the other side is a team that's been playing really well, and especially with Towns and Russell both playing. I've talked about that a lot of times, so I'm not going to rehash all the numbers there. But this is a different team when Towns and Russell are playing. I looked specifically at how Minnesota does against teams that play under a 98 pace because the Knicks play so slow. I could list those off to you, but there's like 12 or 13 teams that play under a 98 pace. And overall against those teams, Minnesota's 8-5, and this is with Towns and Russell. I only looked at games where they were both playing. They've scored 120 or more 4 times, 110 to 119 4 times, and 100 to 109 4 times. They've only been under 100 in 1 game out of those 13. So this is sort of a clash of 2 different trends here where the Knicks are absolutely smoking people on defense, especially at home, 9 out of the last 10 under 100. But then Minnesota has scored 100 or more in 12 out of 13 games against these teams with a slow pace. On the other side, if you look at the Knicks against teams who play with a little bit more pace, because Minnesota's been playing with over 100 here recently. So I looked at teams who play at 99.75 or faster. The Knicks are 6-1, and they've held teams under 100 points in 5 out of 7. 109 is the maximum that they've given up to one of these teams. So where does that leave us for this game? Well, certainly I can see legitimately this game going either way, where Minnesota is able to get their offense going because of those strong trends that they have. But I can also see the Knicks being able to slow it down. The thing for a team like Minnesota is when the pace gets bogged down, it gets tough because you don't get a lot of second chance points. You don't get a lot of fast break points. Your offense can't get into rhythm. So a really good defensive team, I think, can stymie a really good offensive team more than the other way around. So I'm actually, as much as it pains me, and as much as I think the Timberwolves are headed in a positive direction and I like them for the rest of this season, I'm leaning toward the Knicks and the points here. I'm also leaning toward the under. A couple interesting bets that I found as well. For this game to have a total of 191 to 200 is plus 475. A total of 201 to 210 is 330 plus 333. If the Knicks win this game, I think one of those two totals is very likely. And therefore, I do like the under in this game overall. I probably like the under the best out of any of those bets because I do think, like, when you look at Minnesota's scores against slow paced teams, they have won games at times like 103 to 100 and things like that. So I see a scenario where Minnesota still could cover this spread in a low scoring game. And so the under in this game is the thing that I like the most, under 213.5. I forgot a banner for the next one. So we're just going to have to leave it on this. But the other game today is the Detroit Pistons at the Golden State Warriors. In this one, it's Golden State minus 14.5 or minus 15, depending where you look. And the total is 216.5. Now, this is a game that I think is really interesting, and it's mostly interesting because of the Warriors. For a long time, the Warriors are a team that I've loved. I think that they have a chance to win the championship. I still think that by the end of the season, we will think of them as one of the best, if not the best team in the league. However, they are in a phenomenal slump right now. They've scored under 100 in 6 out of their last 7 games. I mean, that is mind-boggling. But one of the biggest reasons here is that Draymond Green is out. And Draymond Green being in or out is one of the biggest swings, both in terms of offense and defense, of any player in the league. They're just a phenomenally different team when Draymond's in compared to when he's out. I was going to see if I had, here's just some numbers on that. So offensive rating, 5.5 points better when he plays. Defensive rating, 8 points better when he plays. They average 5 points more per game, and they allow 8 points less per game. So you're talking about over a 10-point swing between offense and defense when Draymond plays and when he doesn't. And I think that's being reflected in how Golden State is playing right now. The other thing is that Clay coming back is a long-term positive for Golden State, but in the short term, he has to be reintegrated, and they have to figure out how to play with him. That's probably not as big of a deal for people like Steph, who have been around, but for some of their newer players like Gary Payton or even Otto Porter, who's a veteran but is newer to the team, you have to figure out how to integrate him, and he's only playing about 20 minutes a night, so they don't get a lot of time to do that. Also, Steph did hurt his wrist in the last game. It sounds like he's going to play, so maybe not too big of a deal, but it is just another thing to throw on the pile of a lot of uncertainty for Golden State right now. So that would make me think, okay, Golden State's probably not going to put up a lot of points, might be a tough spot for them. But on the other side of that, Detroit is really bad on defense against good teams. The question is Golden State a good team right now? Certainly in the long run they are. But Detroit has given up, I mean, their defensive rating, over 130 a lot of games, over 115 almost every game against teams that are near the top in offense in the league. And so this game just feels really volatile to me. Do we get the Golden State team that can hit threes and put up points in a hurry that shows up against a bad Detroit defense? Or do we get the same Golden State offense we've had for a while now that really struggles and shoots poorly from the field against a Detroit team that's been playing better lately and scoring a few more points? And if Golden State can't get their offense off, then I think Detroit's a team that can hang with them some. So overall, I think this is a tough game. To cap, one other trend that I would say is when Detroit allows a lot of points, like 130 or more, they do tend to rebound a little bit in the next game. So like this wasn't quite 130, but they allowed 129 and then 89. They allowed 144, then 94, 140, then 118, 133, then 87. And in their last game, they allowed 135. So it's a short-term trend. This is only the 5th time all season. But when this has happened, the most points they've allowed is 118. And in every other game, they've allowed under 100 points the game after they allowed so many. So that's going to push me a little bit toward this side of believing that Golden State's maybe going to continue to struggle on offense because Detroit comes out and potentially has a better defensive effort here. And so I'm going to lean toward Detroit plus the points here because, again, if it's a lower scoring game, means it's likely it stays a little bit closer, especially when you get up to 15 points. That's a lot. And then I'm going to also lean toward the under 216.5, which, like the last game, that's probably the play I like the most. I think there is a potential world where Golden State could win this game like 120-95, and then you still get the under. So that's going to be the play that I like the best but it's pretty volatile spot. All right, that's the two games for today. And so now I'm going to switch gears and run through some surprising trends in player impact. I got 6 different ones for you today. And the reason I like to share these is that when a star player goes out, it can feel like an automatic bet. And honestly, the lines move a lot of times in a certain direction because that player has gone out, but it's not always necessarily the right move. And I think these are spots where there can be betting value. And so that's why I want to talk about it. All right. First one is Lamella Ball. This happened last night. And when Lamelo went out, the line moved. And I heard people on Twitter or different places who were like, oh, this is going to be trouble for Charlotte because LaMelo's out. Well, he's been out for 7 games this year. And when you look at the numbers specifically, their offensive rating is 111.8 with him in and 121.8 with him out. So they're 10 points better in offensive rating in a 7-game sample size when he's out of the game. Now, they have been worse on defense by about 8 points. And then it does change when you look at how many points they've actually scored. So they just score 1 more point a game and they give up about 1 more point a game. And so this is a more noticeable in the offensive and defensive rating than it is in the points that have actually been scored or allowed. I think one of the things, and I think this is similar with Memphis and with Charlotte, is they have a lot of really good B type pieces. So when their A player goes out, it spreads around the usage, and they have a lot of different guys who are capable of carrying the load on offense. And you remove a player that is very ball dominant a little bit from the mix, which again, I'm not trying to make the case that either of these teams is better, like that Charlotte's better without LaMelo or that Memphis is better without Morant, but just saying I'm not sure in a small sample size that it's a significant downgrade for those teams. And in fact, there are spots where they've actually been better. Talking about Charlotte specifically now. So like last night when LaMelo was going to sit, it was actually something that made me more interested in Charlotte, not less, for that 1-game sample because of how it affects the line. Next player up is Darius Garland. This one may not be quite as surprising, but it's substantial. And so I just wanted to share it. But so in terms of offensive rating, they're only about 0.8 points better, or 0.8 offensive rating points better per game with Garland in. This is a 6-game sample size. Defensive rating, they are almost 10 points better. And this is the thing that's surprising to me is when I think about Darius Garland, I think about his 3-point shooting. I think about him running the pick and roll with Jared Allen. I think about his playmaking ability. And so I would expect the primary influence that he has to be on the offensive side of the ball. But based on the numbers, his primary influence is actually on defense. When he plays, they give up 9 points less per game, 101.3 compared to 110.2. And on offense, the difference is more negligible. So they score 106 without him and 107.8 with him. So functionally, things definitely run better with Darius Garland on the floor, but it was just surprising to me that the bigger impact here is on defense. And so the influence that this could have when you're thinking about betting is when Garland is out, you might even look for higher totals, or at least higher totals on the other side because he has such a significant impact on defense. Next player we're going to talk about is Clint Capela. This is a 7-game sample size that he's been out this year. He has a pretty significant impact on the offensive side. And the surprising thing to me here is I expected that he would have a really positive impact on the Hawks in terms of defense because he gives them more of an interior presence for shot blocking and rim protection. But it doesn't seem that that's how things actually play out. So their offensive rating is 4.2 points better when he's in. Their defensive rating, though, is only about 3 points worse. They do score about 9 more points a game, and they give up actually 1.5 points less per game without him. So Capela is making a significant difference on the offensive side of the floor, but really not as much of a difference as you'd expect on the defensive side. Atlanta's just been a bad defensive team this year, no matter who's playing, Capela in or Capela out. The biggest thing here that I want to share is actually not Capela himself, but the impact that Clint Capela has on Trae Young. Capela runs the floor and helps to create spacing, and that changes how Trae Young is able to play. So on the season, he averages 5 less points a game when Capela's out. He averages 2.2 more assists a game with Capela in. And I think some of that's directly correlated because Capela can run the floor and get some dunks and things at the rim. And here's the big one. Trey's shooting 8 points better from 3-point range when Capela's in compared to when he's out. So the surprising impact here is not so much Capela on the overall offensive and defensive numbers, but that he has a significant difference in terms of Trey's numbers. And so if you were looking at player props or things like that, that's something to keep in mind for how Trey's going to play in a given game. All right, next one up is one of my favorites because I know I might get some hate for this one. Deandre Ayton is the darling of many people, and he's a good player, no doubt. I'll talk at the end of this why I think the numbers look the way they do for DeAndre. But this is a bigger sample size. DeAndre's been out 15 games, and I think that's enough to start to draw some conclusions about what the team looks like with or without him. In terms of offensive rating, 112.5 with Ayton in, 115.4 with him out. So 3 points better in offensive rating when he doesn't play. In terms of defensive rating, 106.2 with him in, 104.2 with him out. So 2 points better in defensive rating without him playing. They score 3 more points a game, 3.3 when he's out, and they hold teams to 2 points less per game when he's out. And so you would expect that a significant player like DeAndre Ayton would have a positive net effect on the team, even in terms of numbers. But that just hasn't been true when you look at offensive rating, defensive rating, and at points scored and points allowed this year. So why is that DeAndre Ayton isn't having a positive effect on the Suns overall? Well, I think there's a couple factors that could play in here. Number one, they have good athletic bigs who can come in and play in his spot. So DeAndre Ayton's a better player overall than JaVale McGee, better overall than Jalen Smith, but both of those guys might be more athletic than DeAndre is. DeAndre tends to be more of a post-up guy, and so I think that can slow things down a little bit and remove some of the flow from the offense. And they have people on defense who can protect the rim even if he's not in there, so he's not as substantial as another big might be compared to the other people who are in there. The other thing is that DeAndre Ayton is a star player, and star players do demand a certain amount of usage. And so when he's on the floor, they're going to be looking to play through him some, along with Booker and different people. But when he's off the floor, you're not feeling any obligation to play through JaVale McGee or to play through Jalen Smith. And so I think it might free up some of the other offensive pieces to play a little bit freer and remove a piece that they have to play through on the offensive end. So a little bit surprising that DeAndre Ayton in or out hasn't had a massive effect, and maybe even a slightly negative one, dare I say. All right, next person up is Draymond Green. I actually already talked about this in the breakdown of the Golden State game, so I won't belabor it. But just to say, this is a 9-game sample size now, and from the players that I've found anyway, the combined offensive and defensive swing of having him in or out is the most of any player in the league. It's a little surprising because he's not a great offensive player in terms of scoring. But if you pay attention to the NBA, you already knew that he's not great in scoring, but he makes the offense run. He's great with assists. He's great with spacing. He's great at making things work and being the facilitator. So it's not shocking. But just to say the difference with Draymond in or out might be bigger than you might have thought. The last player I want to talk about is Malik Monk from the LA Lakers. Malik's been out for 5 games, so this is a smaller sample size, but there's some significant stuff here. And if you've paid attention to the NBA, this might not be super surprising to you, but if you're more of a casual fan, you might think, Malik Monk, who cares? He's a role player. How much of a difference can it make? Well, at least in a 5-game sample size, it's made a big difference. So their offensive rating with Malik is 110.9. Without him, it's 98.3. So it's making over an 11-point difference in offensive rating when he's in there. Defensive rating, it's pretty much a wash. 110.8 with him in and 111 with him out. So they're just as good on defense with or without him. And then they're scoring 11 points more on average per game when he's playing. The biggest thing here is what he gives them from the 3-point line. He gives them spacing because he's knocking down threes, and he creates better opportunities for other people because he can clear things out a little bit. The Lakers' 3-point percentage is 7 points better when Monk is playing compared to when he's out, and that is a massive difference. When you look at the swings of 3-point percentage from game to game or with different players, Seven points is a big deal, and it makes a big difference in scoring. So Malik Monk being in or out makes a substantial difference for the Lakers. You would think about players like AD or LeBron, and obviously they make a tremendous difference. But I would say outside of those two guys, Malik's probably the one who makes the biggest impact. All right, that's the breakdown for today, Tuesday, January 18th. Just a couple games. Hope if you do make plays on those games, it goes well for you. And I will see you on Twitter. Have a great day, everybody.